I'm certain that virtually everyone here remembers very well what we were doing the morning of 9/11/2001. We remember the events of that day unfolding, the shock, the horror, the aftermath. 20 years ago on this calendar day, our children were going to school in the city. Deanna's father had to pick them up where the school was located on 70th Street and walk with them downtown to 10th Street where their apartment was. And shortly thereafter, they came back to our house in West Hempstead. And I very vividly remember, among other vivid memories, that night, our son Zach, who was 6 years old at the time, looked a little bit nervous as he was preparing to go to sleep. And I said to him, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I'm afraid that a plane is going to fly through my bedroom window." We cannot possibly measure all of the responses, all of the reactions, the emotional ways in which these events impacted individuals and families, the families of those who lost loved ones on that day and days shortly thereafter. The impact is enormous. It is immeasurable. The impact of acts that were aimed at weakening American resolve and undermining American democracy. 20 years later, I want to just share a few reflections, and I would characterize them as follows. The events of 9/11 and subsequent events have taught us the importance of two things. They seem to be divergent, they seem to be at odds with each other, but they are really complementary, they really go hand in hand. The first is that we have to protect ourselves. And the second is that we also have to keep ourselves open. We have to protect ourselves when necessary, and we have to keep ourselves open when possible, and both are essential to our physical and emotional and political well-being. I want to start with the first. We have to protect ourselves. We have to do that unabashedly, and that is done through surveillance, and that is done with partnership, and that is done through ways that lay people aren't even always aware of. And if you read and if you are interested, you will find that there are many, many military operations and intelligence operations that occur below the radar. These have to occur. They protect us and they protect other people throughout the world. I get nervous when we relax too much. I get nervous when we soft pedal the evil intentions that actually exist in the world and still exist. And we should call out extremism in the name of Islam and extremism in the name of Christianity. And there is extremism in the name of Buddhism and Judaism. Anytime that extremist, murderist ideology gets a stronghold, we have to be willing to call that out directly and unabashedly, and we have to be willing to protect ourselves. When people say that they mean us harm, we should believe them, because often they are actually planning to do harm to decent and innocent people of goodwill. And at the same time, we also have to keep ourselves open. We have to keep ourselves open to the possibility of alliances with people of all faiths and no faith who are decent people. And that includes dialogue with Christians and dialogue with Muslims and dialogue with religious groups that we have not really begun to have serious conversation with. We need to be open enough to find decent people of good faith who are willing to partner with us in order to oppose the kind of evil that all too often comes from religious ideology. We need to avoid generalizations about entire religious communities. They are not helpful. We need to be open enough to try to discern people who are murderous from people who, like us, are looking to raise their families and to live in peace and security. And this effort to try to balance protection with openness is not new. Our ancestors in ancient Israel protected themselves from Amalek, and they said, don't forget, do not forget that these people attacked us. They attacked our women and they attacked our children. And that recognition existed throughout the generations. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek tried to do with you. At the same time, our ancestors kept themselves open to vulnerable people in their midst, open to vulnerable people outside of the community that might need a helping hand, and also open to shifting alliances, so that you see that centuries after the children of Israel left Egypt, the prophets were saying, now we can ally ourselves with Egypt because things have changed. They were very much alive to the realities of realpolitik, and they understood that they needed to protect themselves when necessary, but also to open themselves up when possible. I would extend that to the modern state of Israel. Protectiveness when necessary, openness when possible. The journalist Yossi Klein Halevi actually drew that distinction when Israel was dealing with asylum seekers from Africa. He said, these people don't represent an existential threat. And so his colleagues who were saying, keep them out under the guise of existential threat, he said they were overreaching. This was an instance in which Israel could and should be open, but at the same time protecting herself from terror. Absolutely. Protecting herself from people who mean harm. Absolutely. The protection when necessary, the openness when possible. I want to just offer a thought about the High Holy Days and how this theme adheres within these days that we are commemorating right now. And then I want to leave us with an actual visual that I believe is symbolic and hopefully very resonant for all of us. So the High Holy Days, on the one hand, we have passages that speak about self-protection. We actually ask God to avenge the deaths of the innocent in our community over the generations. And the very same High Holy Day liturgy speaks about God's house of prayer, Beiti Yikare Beit Tefillah L'chol Ha'amim, that the house of prayer should be a house of prayer for all peoples. There is a protection, and there is also an openness, an extended hand. And this leads to the image that I want to share with you. So in a Passover Haggadah that we have been using, there is a description of how you can say a certain blessing in sign language. And it's interesting to me what the sign language presented for God is. I'm not sure if that's universal. I'm just sharing with you what was in this Haggadah. I am no expert in sign language. So the sign for God begins like this. And then as you go move your arm down, the hand opens up. So it starts protected, and then it opens up. And I am thinking to myself, how glorious an image is that for the creator of all things. Protection when necessary, but openness when possible. If we don't protect ourselves, there is no future whatsoever. But if we don't open ourselves up, we have to ask ourselves, what is the future worth in the end? So 20 years later, as we continue to struggle with all of the implications of these horrific events, I urge us to protect when necessary and to open when possible. Shabbat Shalom.